Welcome to Media Matrix. I'm your host, Morgan DeBelle-Duplan.
And I'm her co-host, Carly Glowacky.
On today's show, we are discussing a variety of topics ranging from the political process to the influence of media in politics,
to media literacy and terrorism.
First, in the studio is Sean, who will be introducing the political process and the portrayal of both sides of the political spectrum in the media. Now to you, Sean.
Thanks, Morgan. We're here in Studio A, and today we're talking about political process on Media Matrix. It is a great time to have this discussion with the upcoming election this November. Americans across the nation are glued to their iPhones, computer, and however they get their news to see who will be the next president of the United States. The political process is defined by the formulation and administration of public policy, usually by interaction between social groups and political institutions, or between political leadership and public opinion. On both sides of the spectrum, presidential candidates are under pressure from the American people due to political scandals and policy discrepancies. On the other side of the election, the media is only what you make of it. With 6 corporations owning most of the media in today's society, who's to say that the media presented to us isn't spun? The political process has certainly changed over the years due to heavy influence of the media and internet. With this current election being considered one of the most important in our history, it is important for the American people to clearly understand the political process and how it works. If people don't get a well-rounded perspective on politics and government, they are hindering the political process.
Thank you, Sean. Next is Victoria and Professor Rose, in the studio with an introduction to the role of media in politics.
Thanks, Morgan. Today I'm joined by Professor Gary Rose from the Department of Government, Politics, and Global Studies here at Sacred Heart. Thank you very much for joining me today, Professor Rose. So today we're going to be talking about the media's influence on politics. So with that being said, my first question for you, Professor Rose, is how do you think politics has been influenced by the media?
Yeah, it's been radically transformed, quite frankly. At one time, it was the print press, in which people learned about politics, they learned about candidates, they learned about the issues through, journalism, New York Times, Washington Post, you name the papers. That's how people received their information. Along came television and became really the new filter for the American people to absorb, what was happening in campaigns and what candidates stood for. And we know that television has had a dramatic impact, of course, on the way people perceive candidates and politics in general. And then more recently, social media. We have, of course, Facebook and then Instagram, and we have Snapchat now, and then, of course, Twitter. Franklin Roosevelt had radio when he did his fireside chats. Donald Trump has Twitter. And that's how people are learning about politics. Whether or not it's more substantive, I think that's a legitimate question. But we do know that the media really has, for all intents and purposes, particularly the technological dimensions of media, I'm not talking about the print press anymore, really has served as the new filter in the way that people really learn about their politics on a day-to-day basis. And we hope that it is more, in terms of substance and more specific, but at the same time, I have my serious reservations about that.
Well, especially news today, there's so right or left wing, there's no really in between. So do you think television is the biggest factor in influencing the elections and people who vote?
Yeah, we still know that television is without a doubt the predominant source of news for people today. And it is true, there has been a great deal of, what we call narrowcasting. And that's certainly evident with the cable channels such as MSNBC. If you are a liberal and progressive Democrat, call it what you like, then of course MSNBC would be for you. If you are a more conservative type of Republican, Fox News would be where you'd want to go. Now, that said, we certainly hope that ABC, NBC, CBS, hold the line there in terms of fair and balanced, presentations of news. But quite frankly, my own observations of the mainline channels, the main channels, if you will, and CNN put into that category too, I also noticed some narrowcasting going on there too. So I'm a little troubled, quite frankly, that it's obviously NBC and CBS and ABC are not like Fox or MSNBC, but at the same time I'm noticing perspectives as well coming from the reporters and the journalists, which I find a little bit troubling.
So with that being said, do you feel that more people now are being strictly Democrat or Republican, and there's a disappearance within the independent voters?
Well, you know, we still have about 40% of the electorate that regards itself as independent or unaffiliated. However, we do know that even among that block of voters, many of them do lean left or right. We have a very polarized country. And so the media, I think, is in many ways responding to the polarization. And I think we could get into the chicken and egg type of issue here, which came first. But we do know that the electorate is largely broken in half. The American people today are more right on one and left. You know, it really is a divided country. Polarization is really the term that we use. And for a good number of years, we thought that the unaffiliated voters were sort of the swing voters that would sort of balance it out. But even there, we know that among independent voters, it really is only about 10 or 15% that are truly in the middle. And so I'm sure that the media is aware of that fact, and in order to maintain their audiences and their ratings, they have to accommodate the polarization.
Right, and speaking of polarization, you know, there's really, states are either red or blue. There's really no mix or in between. So do you think the media could potentially change that in the future, or do you think we're going to stay polarized for a while?
Oh, well, we're going to be polarized for a long time. I mean, I've seen the research on this, and I've done my own research, and the red states, as you say, are actually getting redder, and the blue states are getting bluer. And it's not just in presidential politics. It's working its way into, of course, gubernatorial contests, congressional, Senate, you name it, you know, right on what we call the down ticket. You find that really the states are more Democratic or more Republican. So it's a very divided country right now. That's why with the presidential election unfolding, whoever is the nominee of the two parties, Hillary is probably going to be the Democratic nominee. Trump maybe, who knows. We can already count on some of these states for sure voting Republican or Democrat, and we can already start to do the arithmetic. This forthcoming election is coming down to really maybe a handful of states, 9, maybe 10 states that actually are going to decide the election. In fact, there was a recent study that suggests that within those 10 states, maybe there's like 7 or 8 counties that are actually going to determine the outcome of this contest. And so, no, I don't foresee the nation healing or coming back together. And interestingly enough, you know, Barack Obama campaigned on a promise of bringing the country together, but during the last 7 years of his presidency, he's got less than a year left, it has become even more divided, more polarized. And so if Obama himself, who campaigned on a pledge of unity and healing, can't do it, then who's going to?
So you would say, in other words, the upcoming president has a lot of work to do.
Very much so, and whoever we elect as president, Victoria, is going to essentially inherit a country that is half of the people will be for the person, the other half will be against. And we're not just talking about against anymore. We're talking about visceral dislikes of candidates and people. And so it's going to be a very, very tough road ahead for whoever is elected president.
So my final question for you, Professor Rose, is how do you think, where do you see the media taking politics in the future?
Well, you know, again, I think the narrow casting, and I think that the media understands that it has to maintain its ratings. They have to obviously keep their audiences, you know, intact. And so the media, you would like to think, you know, there are some shows out there that I actually admire, like Morning Joe. I watched him every morning. Watched him this morning. You know, I have coffee with Morning Joe. I think that's one of the few that are very balanced. But, you know, as far as many of the other channels go, you're not going to find me really trying to get a honest and balanced perspective from them. I think the media is probably going to become more accommodating to the polarization that's going on. And the social media that I had mentioned earlier too, I think is only going to reinforce that. So we have a problem ahead of us, and I wish I had an answer, but I would like to think that the media could do something about that, but actually it's really more, I think, within the grain of the people that's facilitating this.
I think most people would agree with that. Well, that's all the time we have for this segment. Thank you again, Professor Rose, for joining me.
Transitioning to the topic of media literacy, Just how important is it for one to be media literate? With all the ever-changing technology we have today, is this something society hasn't quite caught up to in terms of its effects on our many views, such as political, environmental, and other various issues? Tacuri Carter brings us the report.
Hello, I'm Tacuri Carter. When one wishes to be media literate, they have to take into consideration all the different concepts that are needed so one can speak knowledgeably about the media and the role it plays in our lives. Today, we are meeting with Sacred Heart University's very own Professor Bill Yousman to discuss the importance of being media literate and what role it should have in education. Thank you for coming in today, Professor.
I'm really happy to be here.
Okay, so first, let's talk about yourself.
Well, I have a doctorate in media studies from UMass Amherst, and I've been teaching media classes for about 20 years now. Recently, I came here to Sacred Heart University to start this new graduate program in media literacy and digital culture.
So the real question is, what does media literacy mean to you?
Well, the standard definition of media literacy is the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, and create media. But I also add a component of recognizing the powerful role that media institutions play in creating our world for us. So I add that critical analysis element to it to kind of broaden out what we're talking about when we talk about media literacy.
And why is this important in the K through 12 education system?
Well, as we know, media are so important in all of our lives, not just children, but adults too. But increasingly, we're growing up with all these devices that put us into constant contact with the media world. There's no longer a time of day or a place where we're not constantly involved with and using media. Anything that we spend that much time with and that has such a powerful allure to us, we really should be able to critically understand.
So how do you think we get this topic incorporated in our curriculum for younger students as well as high school students?
Well, it's a challenge actually that we're facing. The rest of the world is kind of more advanced than the United States is on media literacy education. But we live in a political climate where increasingly education is being focused on just kind of standardized testing of narrow topic areas. So the media literacy movement is actually working very hard to get educators and the people who make educational policy more aware of how important it is to include this as part of the curriculum.
And are these key concepts that you're teaching in your course?
Yes, so here at Sacred Heart, I teach an undergraduate course in media literacy where we go into the key principles and the concepts of media literacy, but I also teach a range of media literacy courses in this new graduate program. And so pretty much all of the teaching I do is related to media literacy in one way or another.
Well, thank you. That will wrap it up with our time with Professor Yousman. We'll send it back over to you, Carly.
Thanks, Tacuri. Moving on to terrorism, which in its broadest definition is the use of violence and intimidation in order to achieve a political, religious, or ideological aim. The use of the word terrorism was first used to refer to the French government during the 1793 to 1794 reign of terror during the French Revolution. With today's terrorist activity, we have groups such as Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, Boko Haram, and ISIS, which is probably the most recognized and active group today. All of these groups pick their targets with the idea to create a huge media reaction, to inflict mass casualties, and ultimately strike fear into the general public. Places like Brussels and San Bernardino are now household names due to recent terrorist attacks. Additionally, terrorist groups today are using social media to promote and recruit their cause. But how much responsibility do the social media companies have to take down these accounts? Professor Kate O'Gara shares some of her thoughts in her interview on Media Matrix. To see the rest of the interview and the rest of the Media Matrix show, you can go to www.mediamatrixshow.com.
Imagine that you find out your neighbor has a pound of cocaine under his car and he's selling it to kids in your neighborhood. You then bring the cocaine to the police department and tell them your neighbor was selling it to kids, but then they arrest you instead. That's what currently is happening to whistleblowers in this country. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Anthony Russo. I am here today to talk about whistleblowers and their implications here on Media Matrix. In the past decade, we've had 3 major whistleblowing events. the creation of WikiLeaks by Julian Assange, Edward Snowden and the NSA leaks, and Panama Papers leaking money laundering of many highly influential people in the world. We'll start our report today with the first event, WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks was created in 2006 by Julian Assange, and his website was used to publish top-secret information like the Afghan War Diary, which published 75,000 documents about the Afghan War. That was given to them by whistleblowers so that they would not gain attention, but WikiLeaks would receive the attention instead. There was always controversy over WikiLeaks and what their website was doing, but in 2011, there was a breach in information that allowed the general public to gain access into the U.S. State Department and had jeopardized the security of many individuals because of careless mistakes made by WikiLeaks. Then, Edward Snowden's story is a bit different. Snowden was a contract security agent for the NSA working with other security agencies on various assignments. He had access to many different levels of security clearances while working under the NSA and learned about what programs the NSA was using to spy on allied countries and the American people. In 2013, Snowden took this information that he had learned and archived from the NSA and met with a couple of established journalists to give the information he received and to educate them on the topic. The journalists then carefully released the information out into the public in a manner that didn't create as dire of a situation as the WikiLeaks security breach has. Panama Papers is the most recent of the leaks, happening this year in 2016, and had less of an impact on national security, but more on the integrity of influential people in the world. Panama Papers is a collection of over 11 million documents that includes many present and former world leaders dealing with money laundering, with a law firm advising all of the money and transferring that happened with the banks. The leak has over 2 terabytes of information, which is much more information than either Edward Snowden or WikiLeaks has released. And while the names of the released information may have not done anything wrong while doing this, there are people that legally transferred money, and there are still individuals that have done wrong and will be exposed for cheating the system. There are 2 sides to the whistleblowing, the good and the bad. It's good that there are whistleblowers and they are willing to risk everything so that people are informed on these topics, and so large corporations and influential people and governments will have to worry about future whistleblowers, which can deter them from doing anything drastic with their power. We should also be thankful that there has only been 3 times in the past decade, which means that there's not a lot of bad things happening behind closed doors that we know about. The bad part of whistleblowing is that top secret information could be leaked and that that can endanger the security of organizations and governments and can even endanger specific individuals. But I don't think that's any whistleblower's intent when they reveal this information. They usually release the information with the intent of having stopped what's currently going on. But the hardest and worst part of whistleblowing is when the whistleblower is treated as a traitor by the government and its people. It is understandable for the government to do it, especially when it's something that they have done. But the people should be glad that there's someone willing to lose everything so that people can know what's going on. It's understandable in certain cases to be against them doing it poorly, like the way it was done with WikiLeaks. But if it's done correctly, like in Edward Snowden's case, then it should be something that the public should admire. So I asked this question to you all. If you were to find out your neighbor was selling cocaine and you knew you'd be arrested for possession, would you turn him in?
Good morning, this is Erin Foster reporting for the Media Matrix. Today we'll be discussing fallacies and agenda setting in the media. Mainstream corporate media outlets all use tactics of spin and agenda setting as part of their broadcasting. Some experts suggest that the use of spin and agenda setting are harmful in terms of American democracy, especially with regards to social justice issues such as the Black Lives Matter movement, which came about due to social outcry over racial issues in society and has been a heavy presence in the world of social justice issues since 2013. Dubbed as journalist bullshit, mainstream media has been criticized for muddying the water or trying to spin an idea that is contrary to the reality and complexity of the situation. Many would consider mainstream news outlets such as Fox News and MSNBC to be radically different from each other, considering the differences in ideology. However, is there an illusion of choice? Considering what is known about the chain of ownership, dubbed the Big Six, 6 major corporate megaliths claim ownership over every mainstream media outlet. Although different media outlets may have differences in ideologies, the chain of ownership begs the inquiry of, is there really any real difference in agenda when owned by a corporate America who has one primary objective, making a profit? Especially in terms of social justice issues and recent lengths of activism, many feel that all mainstream media outlets, whether conservative or liberal, all portray inaccurate depictions of social justice issues and their movements, or don't enough spread awareness of them in the first place. Now we turn to Natalie Lorino and Professor Anita August. She teaches English here at Sacred Heart University and is an advocate for social justice issues.
Welcome, Professor August. It's wonderful to have you here today. How are you?
Great. Thank you for having me.
So let's talk first about media and how outlets, news outlets, mainstream corporate-owned mainstream outlets, talk about social justice issues, and what's your observations on how they portray them?
Well, I think it's important for us to consider what type of medium you're talking about. If you're talking about the big networks, then all of them are doing a miserable job as far as I'm concerned. Social justice issues typically arise or bottom-up revolutions or rebellions, so to speak. And most of the media outlets, as you've said, I think you said like 6, they're on like 6 people or 6 groups that own all of them. So I don't know if the message or the ideas of the groups are actually being filtered down or at least exposed in the visible manner in which they should. For instance, if you look at Fox News, they're going to portray the Black Lives Matter campaign in a totally different way than I would say MSNBC or CNN. Now, the irony of that is that CNN and MSNBC believe that they are actually reporting truth, you know. But if you talk to the Black Lives Matter movement people, that's not the truth that they want. So it becomes a question of whose truth is being portrayed.
Exactly.
Whose truth is being portrayed.
And it's really interesting because conservative news outlets like Fox News are typically under a lot of scrutiny, especially from groups like the Black Lives Matter movement, about how they talk about it. And that's when the aspect of what journalism bullshit comes into play, because there's a lot of agenda setting, there's a lot of spin. But at the same rate, news outlets like MSNBC, obviously they're a little bit more liberal, a little bit more objective. But if they're both owned by the same big 6 corporations, is there really a difference in agenda when you come down to it?
Well, I think it's not as wide as we'd like for it to be, or at least from my perception of it. I'd like to see more and more, but who's you know, it's very profit driven, and so I can understand that on some level. But also when we talk about movements like Black Lives Matter, issues related to women, issues of justice, and not just issues of race, but gender, class, all of those issues, we don't see them. And who's really interested in the story? So we have to be careful about that as well. How you generate that type of knowledge, who's generating that knowledge, and does it get to the audiences that's needed, you know? So we have a lot of poverty issues in our country right now. We have an election, and I'm not sure I don't think any of them are really talking about that, you know, the issues of poverty and how they intersect one another, race, gender, and class.
And talking about rhetoric and how like the news perpetuates certain stigmas or stereotypes, we definitely see that, I feel, in mainstream news outlets, how these certain like visual and symbolic meanings kind of continue to be embedded in our society and the way they portray social justice issues, or like the lack of portrayal.
Absolutely. I mean, our knowledge is mediated through visual imagery. And if you constantly are seeing a certain group of people or a certain gender portrayed in a certain manner, then you are being socially constructed to think that this is the way all of that group is. For instance, if you ever noticed on television, you rarely see a person of color, an Asian person or an Indian person, or a person with a disabled body as the expert knowledge. It's typically a white male. So we have been visually constructed to see knowledge and expert knowledge as coming through white males, and so we've got to change that.
And how do we change that?
Well, we can start by having more and more people of color, more women in positions of power where they can make changes like that. And they can actually start to call women and, again, people of color and maybe people with disabled bodies who are experts in those chosen fields and not always turn to white males as the vessel, as the generators of expert knowledge. There are a lot of us out there.
Yeah.
I mean, what you guys are doing, you're having a wide variety of people doing this program, and I think it's important for people to see that.
And talking back again about the Black Lives Matter movement, people who are, I mean, everyone should be interested in social justice issues, obviously, but for people that are kind of getting into it, like, where should we seek our news?
Well, I think the best place to do it is online or in cyberspace, because you're going to get the citizen, you know, you're going to get the typical citizen who's going to go out there and take their camera. And of course, we all have biases, but it's not for profit. And that's one of the biggest things right there. It's not for profit. And these citizen educators out there, they're like the best people in the world to do it. I mean, we can actually see movements start a rise, you know, giving birth through social media that way. And that's what happens with the Black Lives Matter. We saw it. We saw it grow in social media. And by the time it got to the networks, it had been cleansed, you know, of everything that was so beautiful about it. You know, the immediacy, the people on the street who had their cameras and who did not filter it. They gave us, that's what truth is really, that lived reality. So I think we have to start, I think cyber technology has really helped all of us, made us more aware of our responsibility as citizens. You know, you don't have to be an elected official to get out there and participate in your neighborhoods and in the community and how this country is being shaped. We all have a responsibility to do it.
And I guess that's kind of like how we start or talk about these, not even just talk about them, raise awareness, but actually take action, is by making the effort to kind of shift through, you know, Google and see what you find. I mean, there are a lot of like defamatory things online.
Sure.
But then again, we see in, you know, mainstream news outlets kind of the same type of thing happening, because you had the one end, Fox News, where they don't really portray Black Lives Matter as the way the movement should be, or that it tries to advocate for. But then you have like MSNBC and perhaps CNN who don't talk about them enough.
Right.
Even when they do, it's still not, maybe not defaming them, but it's not acclaiming them the way that the movement seeks.
Sure. I mean, and again, that's why it's important to have different media outlets, more than just the top six, and maybe not for profit. I mean, the Feminist Wire, I think that's a group. None of those women work. I mean, they get paid to create that that journal, but they work very hard, and they're doing some great things with really igniting a conversation about feminist issues, and not just feminist issues, but issues around transgendered people, poverty, class, and how they're all interconnected. They don't get paid 1 cent, you know, and I think it's just marvelous what they're doing. And so we need more and more groups like that who are not for profit, and the only profit they get is just making the citizenry a better place for all of us. That is the profit right there.
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting how like there are so many of these underground movements that get perpetuated by underground news media.
Right.
But it's unfortunate that like most of the consumers of knowledge, like in America, they're only looking at CNN, they're only looking at Fox News. So it's almost frustrating for someone who is interested in social justice issues like yourself, for like, I'm assuming that people don't seek it out because they can't. It's not there.
They don't
think of it to look on the internet or figure things out.
Right. You don't. But that's how we've been groomed. We've been coached to think that that's where the news starts, and it just doesn't start there. That's probably the last place if you want to be informed, and informed in a way where it can be liberating. They're probably, the big networks are probably the last place you should look. You should look in your neighborhoods. You should, and talk. You know.
Yeah.
So social media is like the best thing. Go on Facebook. Go on Twitter. Go in those spaces. The problem with that is we still have a digital divide in our culture. What about the more senior members of our society? They may not have as much access as some of us who are younger. So we have to do that. So we have this kind of knowledge gap that's taking place as well. But I would encourage everyone, if you are looking for news, and news that, again, is liberating, and it's going to help the cultures that we live in, because we all live in one culture. The big six networks are like the last place to go. Don't do it.
We don't think of it because we're conditioned since
Absolutely.
birth, you know, since we're out there with our families, you know, watching TV after dinner, like or in the morning, like we are conditioned that this is news and that's it. But it's not really the reality.
Well,
it
it's certainly
isn't.
filtered through a certain lens, and of course the ones on social media. But I think if you look at more sites on social media, you have more outlets.
I think that social media in general is so imperative to learning about these issues. I know for myself, like Twitter has like the hashtags, you know, you see on Tumblr, Instagram, like you see people talking about it, and it's really like mind-blowing how impactful social media has been in recent years. But I don't think imagine if Black Lives Matter had the same traction for like during the times of the 60s.
Right.
You know, if the social media was around back then, like how different things could have been.
Oh my gosh, things would have changed. You know, I think about that. What about the Black Panthers, the women's movement, how that could have changed so much. And I think because we have social media right now, a lot of things are changing much faster than they probably would have without social media. So that's a great thing, but we've got to be careful whose hands is in. We just can't locate it in just the hands of a few people. Everybody should become a reporter. Everybody. And we are.
I think that's our jobs as citizens.
Absolutely. It's our job.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for us today. It's been wonderful talking to you and hearing your insight on these very important issues.
Thank you. And now to Mary in the studio with our 2-minute weather report.
Hi, I'm Mary Awad, and this is 2 Minutes with the Weather. In recent years, temperatures have skyrocketed around the globe due to greenhouse gases and man-made pollution. It made 2015 the hottest year on record in the world's history. And isn't that absolutely fantastic? I know it sounds bad, but for us as New Englanders, it's a really great thing. We had the mildest winter ever. Barely any snow. You could wear a t-shirt on Christmas. We're finally getting that California weather we always wanted. This summer will be boiling. Start stocking up on that SPF 500. But your pool is going to turn into a hot tub and you won't have to pay a dime. Talk about saving energy. And the best part about that is, as far as we're concerned, there are no dangerous consequences. Yeah, we know about that. California isn't in the best shape. The sea level is rising, but that just means the East Coast is becoming more European. Who doesn't want to sail down Fifth Ave on a gondola? Super Venetian. And the polar bears are drowning. A lot of polar bears are drowning, but don't they look so cute huddled up on those melting ice blocks? The world's turning into a microwave oven, and the popcorn's about to burn. But think positive. We get to reap the benefits. So the next time you go out and the weather is unseasonably hot, don't feel too bad. Because even though California is in a drought and the polar bears are drowning, even though your hometown is going to be underwater in 20 years, you're still going to have a really great day. Thanks for watching 2 Minutes with the Weather. Morgan, back to you.
Thank you, Mary, for that very interesting weather report. Looks like I need to stock up on my SPF this summer. That is all for today's show. Thank you for watching Media Matrix. I'm your host, Morgan DeBelle-Duplan.
And I'm your other host, Carly Glowacky. Thanks for joining us.